Okay. Hi, Brooks.
Hey, John, how are you? I
I'm
want to
great.
welcome everybody and you to our second podcast recording for Are You Sure You Want to Do This? This is where we had conversations and lift the veil on the jobs that you think you want, jobs that you probably see from the outside and you go, wow, that'd be super cool. And then you go and you're like, that's not quite what I thought. And I decided after many people asking me about this that with all the amazing people I know in the industry and all these different roles, that I would start a podcast where we talk about what our life is like in the job. And so it's meant to be fun, educational, an opportunity for people to kind of get a peek, not just into like the job, like, oh, I'm at my computer and I do this, but what is that lifestyle like? A lot of times it's the lifestyle that bounces people out of wanting to be an event producer. They're not really, they want, there's a lot of freedom, but there's also not any freedom at the same time. You're sort of owned by your job. So John Kivlen has been a good friend of mine. If I was to put it in terms that he can understand, in 10 years, we will have known each other for 40. Um, it's how he likes to count time, still love it. And John comes to us from, I mean, everywhere,
Mhm.
from touring with Cirque du Soleil to opening entertainment shows and theme parks in Japan to Broadway Asia, Broadway shows in Asia to Universal and on and on. I am such a fan. And when I heard about Kiv, because he is more affectionately known as Kiv and to me, Kivana,
Yes.
I was amazed that he did all of this and was only 35 years old. It's just outstanding what you've done in such a few
And that was only
years.
2 years ago.
It was only 2 years ago. I do believe those were the exact words you guys said to me when we met. You were like, we thought you'd be older.
That's probably true.
That was Marguerite's first words. So, welcome to our show. And I
Thank
want
you.
to start out by asking you, first of all, if you can share with our listeners, like what made you want to get into this? What was sort of the first steps, the first inclination that you wanted to produce and what realm?
Well, let me start off by saying I'm in my early 60s, and that's important because of timeline. Um, I back when I was in high school and college in the late 70s, early 80s, um, you were told, or I was told, and many of us of my age were told, you could not get a job. You couldn't make a career in the arts, any kind of arts, acting, dancing, producing, whatever the case may be. So I had done arts in high school, theater. I stage managed and did the shows and performed and all of that. And I wanted to continue with that. And my family basically told me I was nuts. They still tell me that. And so I went to college and I got a degree in psychology. And I remember I had to drop out of college because I ran out of money. And it was a Wednesday night. And I went to my parents' house and I said, I've got one semester left of college. I'm dropping out of college, but I have good news. Um, I have got a job. And I dropped out of college the following day, Thursday. And on Friday, I started as an assistant stage manager at the Washington Opera at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. And from there, my career just continued. And for anyone who's interested in getting into theatrical producing, dance, circus, Broadway, anything along those lines, as Brooksy will attest to, it just takes hustle. And I mean that in the good sense of the word, not in be a hustler in the bad sense of the word. You just need to get out there and make connections and can tell people what you want to do and continue doing it. And in my career, I started off as a production assistant, assistant stage manager, and my one of the things I can claim is in theater, I have done every single job there is to do in a theater, with the exception of one. And the only job I have never done is I've never directed a show. But I've choreographed shows, I've done lighting design, I've done sound design, I've humped cables, I've swept stages, I've walked behind animals with elephants with a shovel. I've done it all. And the great thing that does though is when you get to be a position of a producer, be it an event producer or theatrical producer or dance producer, is when somebody comes to you with a budget concern or a human resources concern, you've been there. You know what they're experiencing, and you're able to help guide those people either from a budget standpoint or from a human resource standpoint, because you can say I've walked into your shoes because I have. So that's what I tell
Well,
that's what I tell my students in my master classes. Anyway,
well,
sorry.
that's so true. That is one of the things that I tell people, don't just because you've made your way up to producer level, don't think you're above
Oh no,
having to unload a truck.
that's
Right.
right.
And if you and what makes a better producer, again, whether it's theatrical or event producer or in any level, in my opinion, and this goes for any industry, a good boss, a good leader,
Mhm.
is that you understand those jobs. Because like you, I started in craft services and I've just done everything.
Right.
And even after I became a producer, I would get a call.
You still
Hey,
do everything.
I do more. I'm still in charge of crew food 30 years
That's
later.
right.
I don't know
Yeah,
how that happened. Cannot seem to pass that off. But
that's right. You go to
it's true.
craft service and go, where's the M&Ms?
How am I still shopping for this? It is so true. But that
Yes.
is one of the things that is so important, is that you understand the roles. And you can
Yeah,
say, I may not be an expert at hanging lights, but I have hung lights.
that's
I
right.
have driven that truck, and I have great empathy, sympathy for
Yes.
those that do that job. And I think it makes you a better leader when you do that. So,
I
well,
was just sorry, I was just recently in Boston, and we had to take out the trash, and I was hauling trash to the dumpster, and everybody's like, "Aren't you the producer?" I'm like, "Yeah," and
and
and they're like, "Okay," and we just kept taking out the trash.
I remember Karen Bacon and I were standing on the corner outside of Madison Square Garden after an event we had done at MSG. And it's like 2 a.m. and we have the two big old honker suitcases of radios. And we're trying to get a cab, which is not happening.
It was
And
probably raining too.
it was not raining, but it was cold. It was
Yeah,
winter. It was cold. And we just started laughing and we're like, she's who she is.
yeah,
And here she is, creative director, executive producer. I'm her producer. And yet we're standing here with radios. We're not complaining. Nobody else could
no,
take them. We're like, oh, we'll take them,
no,
But it's sort of, you either love it and you love all of it.
that's right.
You got to be all in.
You can't love just
Um,
part of it.
you can't love just part of it, because at some point you're going to have to fill the gap. When someone
That's right.
quit, went home, the union crew was like,
That's right.
gotta go.
Mhm.
AstroTurf rolling out in the middle of the night is all you. And you're like, it still has to happen.
That's right.
So
That's
those are
right. It
fun
still has to be
times.
in by 6 a.m. tomorrow. I don't care how it gets done. It's got to be
Clock
done.
doesn't change.
That's
Got to
right.
happen. And
Yeah,
union crews are union crews. So you can't really blame them. When they time out, they time out. Like
they
right
do.
now. Not, oh, we'll give you 5.
Yeah,
I want to talk to you about your time at Cirque du Soleil, because I know
sure.
that's one of the things a lot of people find super interesting
Yeah,
and don't usually have an opportunity to know people that worked in the capacity that you did with them. So I'd love to hear some about that.
sure. Well, it's funny when I tell people that I work for Cirque du Soleil, the first question they usually ask me is, "Were you an acrobat?" And I'm like, "Seriously? Look at me. Do I look like an acrobat?" No, I was tour manager for Saltimbanco for Cirque du Soleil for 3 years, and I worked on their international touring division, and I did a year and a half in Japan and a year and a half in Europe. And the reason Cirque initially hired me is because I had just finished working on Universal Studios Japan, and that would be my third project in Japan. So Cirque was my fourth project in Japan, and I spoke Japanese, and I could speak not fluently, but I could speak pretty well. I could attend meetings. And so Cirque sent me back to Japan. And to this day, it's probably one of the top 3 jobs I've ever had in my life because it was so much fun. Now, one of the things that people kind of fail to tell you about is when you're doing a show that's recurring and recurring and recurring, it's the same show every night. It can get a little tedious, but I tell you, I saw my show Saltimbanco 444 times. I know that by memory, and I never got tired of that show. It was just special all the way. We were one of the first ones to go back to Japan. We made a nice profit for Cirque, and then they continued sending shows back. And then I was over in Europe for a year and a half as well with my lovely wife, and yeah, it was great. But to get into the nuts and bolts of what I was doing is I was the tour manager slash producer, on-site producer. I had 9 different departments that reported to me, 9 different direct reports, but I had 155 people that I was responsible for from 55 different nationalities around the world. I used to joke at the time that I was a mini Kofi Annan, who happened to be the head of the United Nations at the time. I can't really explain how much fun it is just to go backstage before a performance, after a performance, and talk to the performers and talk to people who were there. And I'll just tell you a quick little story. When I was in Japan, we used to have movie stars and TV stars and royalty, and I mean, all over the world. Here in America too, we had all sorts of big name people who would show up. And I used to go, and they would show up with their 10, 15 handlers and yes men and secretaries and assistants and all that kind of stuff. And I went to one of the crown princes and I said, you can come backstage, but only 2 of you. There was a group of like 15. I said, you're allowed backstage, but only 2 of you can come. So the crown prince, you're welcome to come and you can pick one other person. And of course, the handlers and the managers are like, oh, no, they need the security, they need this, they need that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you right now, you can have 2 people. If you don't agree to 2 people, then you can't come backstage. It's my house, my rules. And they're like, okay, fine. So they finally agreed. And what happens in those instances with movie stars or actors, performers, crown princes, he came backstage and none of the cast knew who he was. They had no idea. He was just another Joe, coming backstage. And so what would happen, and same thing with the movie stars in Europe, they would come backstage and maybe 2 people would know who they were, but no one would know who they were. And what happened though is the performers, the crown princes, the prime ministers, all of the people who came backstage, they were talked to like people, as opposed to being talked to like a crown prince or a movie star or anything like that. And every single one of them came up to me at the end of the tour backstage and was like pumping my hand. Oh my God, John, thank you very much for not allowing everybody backstage. You made me feel like a human being again. I was actually able to talk to these people. And for the performers, the high-end performers, the movie stars, TV stars, things like that, they were able to communicate performer to performer, as opposed to movie star to acrobat or whatever the case may be. When I was with Martha Graham, I was also a general manager with Martha Graham. Oh, yeah. We had famous people come backstage, as you know, Brooksy in New York. We have famous people coming to the shows all the time. And I remember Woody Allen came backstage. And this is before there was a big folderol with Woody Allen, when he was still a very famous film director. I guess he's still a famous film director. And he came backstage and it was the exact same way. Is the performers were very nice to him, but they didn't treat him like the big show director or movie director or anything like that. They treated him like an audience or a fellow performer. And he absolutely loved it because he was able to talk to the performers, performer to performer, or or director to performer. And they absolutely loved that interaction, as opposed to, oh my God, can I have your autograph? Nobody did any of that stuff. And people loved it. And so after that happened in Japan, for the first 2 or 3 instances, I made it a blanket policy for the rest of the tour. And it's now a blanket policy for any of my shows. If royalty or movie stars or anybody like that comes backstage, I still do the exact same thing. And it's more for
great. Yeah, that's really great. I would never have thought of it that way, but what a treat for the celebrity.
For them.
Well, yes, and we have some mutual celebrities that we know, and some of the stories they've said, they don't get to go anywhere. They can't take their kids to Six Flags. Right. They can't. I mean, one of them, I had to chaperone their own daughter's Sweet 16 party because they couldn't get anywhere near it.
Right. Which is a shame, which is so sad, because they should
really
be able
sad.
to enjoy themselves like anybody else. We've had the same thing in different theme parks where they come and they're like, well, we have to show up an hour before, and we're going to wear a baseball hat and we're going to wear our dark glasses. And I'm like, no, honestly, if you just walk around like a normal human being, 90% of the people aren't even going to notice you. Yeah. Some will, but most of them won't. And when I tell them that, of course, their handlers and this, oh, yes, we can't do that. And I'm like, just try it for an hour. Try it. And they do it. And they're like, oh my God, nobody knows who I am. This is terrible.
Yeah, this is terrible. Yeah. So let me ask you this: touring. Sure. What was the hardest part about touring? If you had to say there was something that was difficult,
Um,
or about being on the road, life on the road, not so much the
well,
job.
I'll answer both questions. I left Cirque after 3 years. The reason being is because I just got tired of living in hotels, and moving from hotel to hotel to hotel for 3 years can be, you want to come home to your house. You want to come home to your blanket because on Cirque, everyone is only allowed two bags, two
Mm.
suitcases. So you usually have you have your summer clothes and you have your winter clothes because we went in different temperatures all over the world. But I would say the biggest challenge for working internationally is just that, is working internationally and the cultures
Mm.
and understanding the cultures, and being forgiving and being open to different ideas and things along those lines. Because what works for you in Japan ain't going to work for you in Spain. And what works for you in Spain ain't going to work for you in Australia. And so you just have to be patient and understanding, um, and move forward. The job gets done. It's just, what's that? I can't remember that old adage of, we're gonna do the job, but we're gonna do it a different way. But it comes out to the same ending, so who cares? Yeah, yeah. The audience loved it, so who cares?
So who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine jumping from cultures could be a bit of a challenge when you're moving through that quickly. You're not in any
Yes.
one place very long. If you were to pick something within the job, is there anything, and this is more of a global question
Mhm.
about the career that you have,
Yep.
uh, was there anything about it that was a surprise to you? I mean, was the job as a producer what you thought it would be? Uh,
No.
right.
The biggest surprise, I guess the biggest surprise to me is, you always picture the producer, sitting like in the back of the theater with an assistant and they're taking notes, and they might be sitting there smoking a cigar, in the olden days, or sipping on a martini or anything along those lines. And that's about as far from a producer as I've ever met. Um, as a producer, you basically, and this inherently Brooksy, uh, a producer, you do what needs to get done. And if that means you're rolling out AstroTurf at 4 o'clock in the morning because the crew left at 3, then that's what you're doing. If you're sewing costumes at noon because the costume people need an hour break, but the star's going on stage in 30 minutes, that's what you do. Um, a lot of it is budget and personnel. There is that part of it, and managing the client, massaging the client, making the client happy. But you do what needs to be done. And if you're not prepared to do everything, then this job is not for you. And what I mean
That
by that is globally as a producer.
that is so true. That was what fascinated me as a Gemini, jack of all trades, master of
Yeah,
none. So that's kind of a negative thing, but actually, it's true.
not at all. It's
I
very true.
know I know an awful lot about an awful lot, but none of it do I master.
Right.
My greatest talent, I always tell people, is I know a lot of really talented people, and I know how
Yep.
to put them in a room and create magic where they work well together. But
Right.
if you need to jump in and drive that truck, that's what you're doing.
Well, probably not unlike yourself, my parents possibly still to this day don't really know what I do. And so my explanation to them for theater is, what a show director does, what a choreographer does, what a music director does, what actors do. They all work for me. But that's what I love about this is I work with the crazies, I work with the zanies, I work with the ADHD, I work with the wackadoodles that come up with the really creative ideas. And sometimes it's really, really, really fun. Sometimes it's not, but I would say 90% it's really fun. And I'll tell you, another quick story, and I know you've experienced this too, Brooks, is the director, the choreographer, the music director, pick your poison, comes to me and says, John, I need another $15,000 and I can do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, I've got 5. And they're like, no, I need 15. I'm like, no, I've got 5. And then what happens is they run off and they pout for about a day. And then they come back to me and go, oh my God, we've come up with this great idea and it's only going to cost $4,000. It's this. And what happened is because I put in parameters for them, they got even more creative and they came out with better ideas for less money. And that's the part, that's one of the things that I just love to see is you can literally see the light bulbs going off over their heads. And you're like, what about this? I'm like, I would have never thought of that in a million years. And what a great idea.
Well, there was a quote, and anyone listening that's going to fact check this, pardon me if I get it slightly wrong, but I believe it was in Tina Fey's book or something I read where Lorne Michaels was asked, the role as executive producer in Saturday Night Live, what his main job was. And he quoted somewhere saying his job was to curb the enthusiasm of others. And
that's right. I completely agree with that.
I thought that's so true because, like you said, you have your set design team and your light design team, and they're all brilliant creatives.
Yes.
And what's so beautiful is they're all working in their space, bringing their best to the table. But as a producer, you have to manage that creative energy so that you do get the best. But at the end of the day, our job is to come in on budget and on time for our clients and deliver an exceptional show.
Right.
So in order to do that, it's saying, I love it. I think a 30-foot cake is fantastic idea,
Yes.
but we need to bring it in. Let's try 6 feet. That's still pretty big.
Yeah.
So I love that part because it makes me be a better producer. The more outlandish the ideas that come from, and often the client, I love clients that have just really, really fantastic. And they're like, we're not sure about this. And I'm like, well, bring it. Let's see.
Yeah.
Because it's fun to try to figure all that out.
I will add one little caveat to that is this is kind of a little strange for me being interviewed because not unlike yourself, another aspect of being a producer is we don't take the limelight. If there's press, if there's praise, it's the artistic director, it's the show director, it's the choreographer, it's the client, it's whatever. We're kind of Oz behind the curtain that you never see. And sometimes it's a little hard, but I started as a stage manager, so I was always watching the show like this. So
I started as a groupie and decided I needed to get paid for my time with the band. So love of music.
Yes.
No, it is odd. The interview process. I only touched on that when I was in Sacramento, being the district director for the waterfront from Old Sacramento. Right. I was unknowingly, when I took the job, put in a position where I had to do the interviews with the morning shows and stuff about all the events.
Right.
And terrified.
Yes.
Okay. And you know me, people know me, they're like, oh, you're gregarious. I'm like, It's one thing being fun at a cocktail party. It's another thing getting in front of a camera and having to learn how to deliver that message in the 90-second spot. That's and I ended up loving the on-site remotes where they put the bug in your ear. So you're looking at the camera and they're in the audio, they're in the studio and you can only hear them. I got over the fear, but it took like 5 or 6 studio appearances and stuff for me to get used to that. Cause you're as a producer, don't expect anyone to say your name from the stage and be like, thank you so much. Because you got to want to do this because you love the product. You love the journey. Actually, I don't even always love the product. I mean, the events are always great, but it's the journey and the team that I love. By the time everybody shows up, I'm happy to see the client and everybody having a great time because we've done our job. But that is where, for me, it starts to dip because we're now going to wrap this. And I've just enjoyed the collaboration with the team and also with the client. Right. So I got a couple other questions. Oh, go ahead.
Sure. One other thing I always tell people about being a producer and all that is I always tell them for live theatrics anyway, live theatrical shows, count the number of people on stage. For every single person that's on stage, there's 6 people backstage that you'll never see. And you may not know their names, but I encourage you to read the credits in a playbill, in a program. I encourage you to sit and watch the credits on a movie because all of those people played an integral part in making that production happen again and again and again. And producing events is very similar. You never see the people backstage. You only see the product. And for a good show, a good theatrical show, it's the exact same way. You'll only see the actors, your costumes, scenery, lighting, sound, but you won't ever see those 6 people backstage. And so there's a ton of people working backstage that you'll never see, but that deserve high, high praise.
So well said, and that is true. Those are you and I would not have jobs if it weren't for those people.
That's true.
And that's what I tell
Very
people.
true.
They're like, "Oh, Brooksy, thank you so much." I'm like, "Well, thank you. I brought on a good team, but if they weren't as so great at what they did, then this wouldn't happen."
Darn
Because
people.
I don't cook or make costumes. Yeah, well, so with that said, some people say, okay, I want to, Kiv, I want to do what you do.
All right.
And my question to you is, if you weren't doing what you do,
Yeah.
what would you do? Is there anything else out there that you have kind of bumped into through the journey where you thought, I love what I'm doing, but if I wasn't doing this, that's pretty cool.
The only other thing I would love to do other than what I'm doing right now is teach, but I would want to teach what I'm doing to other people, because there's it's really, I mean, I jokingly say, and I know you do too, Brooks, what I do, when people say, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I'm a producer, and it beats working, because it's really fun. Doing what I do and working with the creative people and making the shows happen. But I think maybe a teacher. I would have enjoyed being a teacher.
Good answer.
Well,
you could still do that. Maybe
I do actually do that. I teach master classes in international producing, because I will say, just to put in a plug really quick, not for me, but for producing internationally, is a lot of people, particularly Americans, are very stuck on, you only want to work on Broadway, or you only want to work in the United States, or something like that. And I tell my students, I've said, at some point, what's going to happen, or I hope what's going to happen in your career, is somebody's going to come along to you and they're going to say, I'm going to offer you a job in New York City. I'm going to pay you $80,000 a year. Conversely, I'm going to offer you a job in Lima, Peru. I'm going to pay you $35,000 a year. And I ask the students, which job are you going to take? And they're all like, well, I'm going to move to New York. And I'm like, no, absolutely the wrong answer. Take the job for $35,000 in Lima, Peru. The reason being is because what's going to happen is you're going to come back to the United States at some point in your life, and somebody's going to hire you, not necessarily because you're a great producer or anything along those lines, but because you have that international experience. And that person who is making $80,000 is now making $90,000 a year, and you're going to demand $150,000 a year in your salary because you've got that international experience. So get your passport, take the international experience, get out of the country, go see the other cultures, and have fun.
Oh, that's really great advice. That's fantastic. That leads us down towards my advice section.
Okay. Well,
in terms of the
actually,
sacrifice.
Could I ask you, if you weren't doing event producing, what would you do?
Well,
I've never asked you that.
True story. If you'd asked me this like 4 nights ago, it would be QVC host, because
Okay.
because I somehow found myself on QVC at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. And I was like, you know what? Despite not having any sales experience, I probably could have been really good at that.
I think so. Joan Rivers did it.
Yeah, she did. She did it well.
She did.
I think, though, the things that I come up across that I would have done, I probably would have gone into sound engineering.
Really?
Working in, I would have probably been more involved in the recording industry and music. Okay. Now, I am hoping to have on my podcast someone I went to high school with that I have not spoken to in 40 years since then. But he has done very well in the recording industry. And I am very curious to have him on, because for me, that would be the job that, like, it looks good. I've been around it enough. I've been in editing studios. My uncle is a sound engineer and technical producer. So it's not something I'm totally don't know anything about, but I really, really am drawn to sound editing for some reason. Despite the poor quality and my inability to edit this podcast.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. That would have been one, and creating soundtracks for movies.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, those have always kind of been on my back burner of like, maybe
Yeah,
next time.
yeah.
Let's see. We have about 10 minutes left, and I
All
know
right.
you and I could talk for days,
Really good.
which is what Steve and I had to wrap it up. So we may do a part two, but this has
All right.
been really, really great. The really important thing that I hope that people enjoy from this podcast is they heard some of the stories, kind of got a sense of what our life is like and days are like. And I would love for them to be able to get in touch, if they had any questions about getting into the industry. So you just shared you're doing masterclass with Producing International.
Yes.
But other than that, is there a way that people can reach you if they have any questions?
Should I give them my personal email address? Is that?
That is up to you.
Yeah, I don't know.
I plan on having 5 million listeners. So,
Oh, I think. I'll tell you
listen,
what.
I'm no Joe Rogan. Okay. We'll
Not
see
yet.
how many people. Not
yet.
I'm coming for you, Joe.
That's good. I'll tell you what. For those who are interested, how about if they reach out to you and then you can give them my number or my email address? How's that?
I'll do that. I'll do that.
One thing I did want to pass along to your listeners though is I've worked on cruise ships. I've worked in modern dance. I've worked in circuses. I've worked in theme parks. I've worked in Broadway. I've worked in all around the world. I've been to 50 different countries. I've been to all 50 states, 52 countries now. Don't pigeonhole yourself. If you want to do something else, keep your options open and try different things. If you love opera, great, do it. If you love sound engineering, great, do it. But keep your options open and try different things, and you'll be surprised how attractive you become to those different options.
Well, you know what? Because we do still have a few more minutes here on the record. What do you say to someone? Because I started out, like I always knew what I wanted my day to be like. I did not know what the job was, right? I knew I didn't want a 9 to 5, which this is actually more of a 4 to midnight job. So it's not about the length of hours. It's
4 a.m. to 4 p.m. plus the 6. Yes.
Correct. But I didn't know what character in the story I was. And that's what I tell people when they ask me and they come and they volunteer on my events because they're curious about getting into the industry. And I'm like, come and work a load in first. We start there. And if you don't like my job, what was it that drew you to the industry? Like, what is the other jobs out there that are of interest to you? So that works really great when you're in your 20s. And like you said, you're doing the hustle. What about if you're 40 or 50 and you are looking to jump in? Now it's a little bit harder to just take off and go to Peru, kids, family. Is there any thoughts you have on how you pivot into a career like this and the opportunities that are available for older people that are looking to shift?
Absolutely. And that is get involved in your local community theater. And the reason being is, or get involved in your local community events, and some of them actually pay. So it's not necessarily volunteering, although that's usually where most people start. But if you get involved in I would say 99% of the community theaters in the United States, you come in and you say, wow, I really want to be an usher, or I'll start off as an usher. And before you know it, on the next show, you're the lighting designer. Because you went to somebody and said, hey, I'd really like to sit and watch you do that sometime. And they're like, okay, well, guess what? You're the lighting designer on the next show. And you're like, what? And that's kind of how it starts. And just go and get involved. And, I was just executive director of a theater company here in Southwest Washington a year or two ago. And we had a performer who came in. He was a performer. And I said, I'd really like to learn about lights. And now he's one of their lighting designers. He still performs, but now he's one of their lighting designers. He found another thing that he just loves to do. I think he actually is studying geology in university, which is actually a really good paying job, by the way. He should do that. But he fell in love with lighting design, and now he's a really good lighting designer.
Good point. Gonna throw this in. I had 2 employees once. One was always ready to take my job. Always.
Yes. Oh yeah. There are
and
those
the
people.
other, well, and that was good for him. And eventually he did. I mean, I left, but he eventually made his way through the system or through the system. It was a prison. No, just kidding.
Your parole board? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were dark days.
Yeah.
No, but he was always ready. And the other one was not. And there was a time when I had to go do a morning show and she did not show up dressed to take the stage. And I said, you can't wear that. She's like, well, it's casual Friday. I'm like, but we're going to the studio.
Right.
And I said, you know, if so-and-so was here, he would be in his suit, would be hoping I fell and hit my head so he could jump on set. Right?
Oops, somebody pushed me over.
Right? He's
Yeah.
ready. He's ready to step in. And that's a good thing. And I said, you, on the other hand, did not show up. What if something happened and all of a sudden we needed to put you on air because I couldn't do it? You should always be ready, because some of the best opportunities and some of my early opportunities came because I was ready to step in when someone either didn't show up or couldn't do it or something happened, and I was there ready, willing, and able, whether I was skilled for it or not.
Yep.
You just have to be brave enough and trust yourself to take that leap when that opportunity opens. Sadly, and I will say this, I'm 56. I'm doing a lot of different things. Starting this podcast is like a whole new thing. And there's a lot of, thank you. But as you get older, it is harder to be that willing because the stakes become higher, because you're supporting a family, because you have a lot more to lose if it doesn't work out. And I just want to tell people that those feelings that you have that are normal, and push through them.
Yep.
You know, so I appreciate what you said about.
I think it was Mark Twain or someone like either Mark Twain or someone along those lines who said opportunity is something like 10% luck and 90% being in the right place at the right time. And I know I'm paraphrasing and I'm probably wrong about who said that, but it's true. It's, you know, it's everything kind of builds up to a moment, and you kind of always have to be prepared, because you never know when your moment's going to come. And when it does, you know, you shine like the sun.
And you have to be ready. On the interview that I did, they wanted to know like what my highlight was. And I said, well, surprisingly, my highlight was sort of my first job. And that was the assistant line producer role on opening closing ceremonies, Paralympics.
Oh, yeah.
1996. I'd been a craft service and a production assistant. That's what I'd been doing. But I happened to interview for a PA position. The gentleman hiring me happened to know my uncle. And he was like, you know what? You're good. You're in production assistant. But they needed an assistant line producer, and there was no one to fill the shoes. And I just started doing the job. I didn't know I was doing it. And I sort of got that title, kind of started to match. But I've never worked so hard for 4 months in my life. Like, talk about sleeping at your desk for days. And I loved it.
And you're probably
God, it's practically free.
Yeah.
But it was, I knew I will never look back. Yeah. Like, I will never look back. This is the greatest thing I've ever come across. And still 30 years later, I still get goosebumps when the trucks show up for load in. It's still great. So if you can find something you love to do and you can feel that way about it, most days, it's not always like this.
True. Some days I don't want to get out of bed.
No. So it's been tough post-COVID. The industry shifted, but it's still a great way to earn a living if you're up for it. So,
by the way, one more little recommendation I'm going to give to people is, when you're on a crew or you're on a team or you're working with a group of people, be friendly with everybody. And I know that's hard to do because some people are jerks, but try and be friendly with everybody, because what this industry, and I mean entertainment, events, this entire industry is all about connections. And I can guarantee your next job is going to come to you because of connection you made on your last job. It's not going to come from looking, at Monster Board, or, I mean, maybe those help, or LinkedIn or anything along those help. Don't get me wrong, but 90% of the job is going to be, hey, I know a producer, somebody who used to do events. I should call Brooksy, see if she's available. That's how you get your next job. So be as friendly as you
and you never know where that's going to come from. I mean, some of the
Right.
craziest, biggest opportunities I've had have come for people like someone that was one of 10 makeup artists on a job.
Right. Yeah.
And
You
that
never
makeup
know.
artist, right. And that particular makeup artist was doing makeup for Gilmore Girls, who happened to have someone show up on set who happened to want to do the Bryant Park market for the first year. And he was like,
Right.
I only know one person that's crazy enough to do this in 4 weeks. That was me.
Yeah.
And another one was a production assistant who worked as a wardrobe steamer for costumes on a job. Never even met this person.
Yeah.
But
You never
they
know where it
they
comes from.
knew that people really enjoyed working on the teams and the leadership that I brought. And I got a really, really big job from that, someone I never met. So that's really, really good advice. And I appreciate that.
Sure.
All right, Kivana, we are going to wrap this. I'm going to thank you so, so much. And do stay on when I stop record. I'd love to say hi to your lovely wife who made me this necklace. But thank you. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more. Are you sure you want to do this? Because we know we want to do this. And we will tell you exactly what your life can be like. And I look forward to having other guests. And I look forward to a part 2. I think we got more to talk about here.
Bad.
So, thanks,
Brooks. Okay.
Thank you.